liked how they sort of went from 2001 to 2004, I believe, and then to 2007. It was interesting that the beginning parts of understanding common factors that we saw in the 2001 article connected to 2004, and then kind of was wrapped up in the 2007 article. So a lot of the questions that I had were sort of budding or emerging information from the 2001 article were kind of buttoned up by the 2007 article. So it was nice to see the progression of the model or the theory of the therapeutic approach. I'm just going to highlight some of the things from each article that stood out to me. So that first article from 2001, the Blow and Sprinkle article, they did this study. It was quite interesting. They talk about the different characteristics of the academics and clinicians that they studied. And of course, something that I noticed initially was that there was a mention of gender, but there wasn't an inclusion of different races, and it was mentioned in the limitations, but it really was just a sentence given to the limitations that there wasn't a variety of race and wasn't a huge variety of gender, which to present day isn't quite representative of the field, but maybe at that time was more representative of the field. One of the things that really stood out to me in the article was sort of teasing out these different common factors, and the first being the client and extra therapeutic factors, so that the client's motivation came up really high in terms of seeing the importance or the effectiveness of clients' motivations to change, or client motivation. But I thought it was quite interesting that external life factors did not make the final cut of the study. So they did that phase 1, phase 2, and then the wrap-up interviews. And that external life factors did not make the cut. I found that to be quite interesting because we think of our field in terms of systems and this sort of systemic thinking. And the idea that like someone's external life factors, meaning like what all may be happening in their life outside of just their motivation to change, or outside of just how they present, or outside of just their alliance to the therapist, or outside of the model, or outside of these common factors, that whether you are poor, that you live in public housing, or you live in a multi-generational home, or that you live, that you experience, racism and oppression and trauma on a daily basis. The idea that those things would make the cut for clients being able to change, or mechanism for change, or common factors and experiences, I found that to be quite interesting. And if I were to look closer at the study, might put it as a limitation in terms of, or a critique of the study, that I find it really hard for us to consider ourselves systemic thinkers and systemic clinicians, but to not incorporate external life factors for clients as having implications on their therapeutic process. So that was something that came out to me. And then also, something that was quite interesting was I found that postmodernism in that first article felt like it was being blamed sort of for where the field is going, and this distance from being a director as a clinician to a collaborator, and that postmodernism is making it challenging to really hone in on what some of these mechanisms of change are, because there's such this sort of relativistic, constructionistic perspective that comes with postmodernism, and that could be me being biased because I consider myself to be a postmodernist thinker. But at the same time, for 2001, I could see how the debate probably was still really sort of heavy, sort of strong with the modernist, that sort of binary positioning. But I think now, 2019, I think that postmodernism has really brought the field forward, as opposed to it has sort of stunted its growth, or stunted an understanding or conceptualization of clients and how they change. So I did find that to be interesting. And that also trust came out, and that was no surprise to me, that trust between the therapist and client being extremely strong predictor or motivator of change in the therapy process that I could have predicted. And then I think also ethics and integrity, ethical integrity came out as a big one as well. And I thought that was quite interesting that clients might pick up on an aspect of integrity, because the way I understand integrity is like moral uprightness. And so when you bring morality into the conversation, that clients are even picking up on that, I think that is quite interesting to think about. And then, so we talked about the limitations. We talked about, and that there's safety in the therapeutic environment. That also came out as a really high element in the study. That there's safety in the therapeutic space, which again would have been something that I would have predicted as high in motivating change or creating change or efficacy or effectiveness, right? So that was that first article. I thought it was a nice beginning introduction as to making an argument for why common factors are relevant, why it's important that we even begin to think about a common factors lens that models can sort of be looked at through. And I think that also my understanding of common factors prior to some of this reading really was that it was its own theory. And really what Blow and Sprinkle make a case for is that it's not a theory in as much as it is an approach. And that theory can be funneled through or seen through the lens or the approach of common factors. And I think that resonates more than creating another theory, because there's, like you said, there's about 500 theories, in this field. But I think looking at common factors as an approach resonated for me. Okay, so skip to the 2007 article. 2004 article, it had some interesting points. I think the biggest thing that came out was like the high allegiance of researchers, and that being interesting. A lot of the research that we see, whether it's in functional family therapy or EFT or evidence-based research or multidimensional therapy, pushed in a way that it is producing these results, but at the same time, these researchers are getting doctoral students that are also proponents of the research and the models, and so you have this high allegiance of researchers, and then so what comes out is essentially like all the benefits to doing these models, and we don't really often critique and sit and study where these models fall short. And I think the 2007 article sort of brings up a lot of the points that we talked about in class at the residency. The model that we were looking to find gaps in was EFT, and the 2007 article really brings in some of those gaps, and that being that you can account for, or it's challenging, and we haven't as a field yet begun to really account for the therapist in its entirety or in their entirety and what they bring into the session. And that a lot of these studies are done under the assumption that therapists are monolithic, or that even if you have a white, cisgender, male, middle-aged, upper-class therapist, that brand of therapy, with all those factors, those traits, are going to yield the same results. Like, humans are dynamic, and so which is what makes it challenging to really measure therapist efficacy based on those personal traits. They describe them as observable traits and inferred traits. And they talk about these observable traits being gender, race, and age. And I just found it quite interesting. I firmly disagree that you can really measure a therapist's effectiveness within those observable traits or even inferred traits of personality or gender or race or age, because gender, race, age, personality don't function in silos, right? So like, just because you have the same experience of someone of the same gender and the race and the same age does not mean that as a therapist, their therapy is going to come across in the same way. So I disagree with even that category of understanding therapists, but I understood where they were going, particularly when they talk about cultural competency and the importance of that. And that really resonated for me. Okay, so I don't want to make this video too long, but that stood out. A therapist's allegiance to a model, makes them practice treatment with a certain tenacity and enthusiasm. And so trying to tease out whether it is the model or it's the therapist's enthusiasm of the model. Again, back to that allegiance point. There's so many points, and I agree with the 2007 article that there needs to be more research done on therapist efficacy and the therapist as an individual and what they contribute to change. But again, I find it challenging to, like, humans are so dynamic. How do we really measure for some of those observable or inferred traits, particularly when there is allegiance to a particular model and all those kinds of things. So, let's see, what else? Therapist vulnerability. Um, so this idea came up in the first article, this 2001 article. They quickly outlined some predictors, and one of them was privileging the client, which for me resonated because it sounds very postmodern. It's something that I believe very strongly in. And then it wasn't used in the DQI as one of the brackets or one of the components. But then we get to the 2007 article, we sort of start talking again about how it's privileging the client's worldview, not the therapist's worldview, which I thought was quite interesting because I would have thought that it was the therapist's worldview that we're bringing in. But the article pretty much asserts that research has shown that it's the client's worldview, even though I think the article that they reference is from 1997, so I'd love to see some more up-to-date research on this, but that essentially that it's the client's worldview that's impacting the ability to change. So the therapist sort of being able to morph or adapt to what the client's worldview is, which I don't know, have I really agreed with that? And again, as educators in academia, how are we teaching common factors? Because I'll be honest, in my program, in my graduate program, we didn't have any conversations about common factors. That wasn't really a model that was really put forth, a theory, a lens, or an approach. So all that to say, I definitely think common factors should be more intentionally incorporated into academic curriculum. And I think that looking more at therapist efficacy or effectiveness and what actually creates the change about the therapist. What is it? And I think that that's a challenging thing to tease out, but I think it's meaningful research for the field. When we think about common factors, when we think about client motivation, when we think about the therapeutic alliance, and that being, the greatest predictor of change, it seems incumbent upon us to do some more research in that way. So, articles, I really appreciated thinking about the discussion over common factors, and I love to